Artemis II is in serious trouble, and for 4 whole minutes nobody will be able to do anything about it. When Orion hits the upper air layers at 40,000 kilometers per hour, the air around it will turn into a glowing wall of superheated gas so thick that no radio signal can pass through it. The crew will watch their windows turn bright white. They will feel their bodies pressed hard into their seats. They will hear the air tearing open around them. And back in Houston, every single screen in mission control will go completely blank. Nothing at all. No connection. If the heat shield does its job, contact comes back. If it fails, the quiet just goes on forever. Reid Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Jeremy Hansen lifted off from Kennedy Space Center on April 1st, 2026, riding the most powerful rocket NASA has ever launched. They are the first people to travel beyond Earth orbit since Apollo 17 left in December 1972. The first woman ever to go past low Earth orbit. The first black man. The first Canadian. Their ship will carry them more than 46,000 kilometers from Earth, going about 7,600 kilometers past the far side of the Moon. Farther than any human being has ever gone, and every single meter of that record-breaking trip has to be paid back when they come home. Getting to the Moon is about having enough power. Getting home is about staying alive. The part of this mission that keeps engineers up at night is not the launch, which went almost too smoothly. It is not the big engine burn that sent Orion flying toward the Moon. It is not the 50 minutes of silence when the crew passes behind the Moon, where no signal from Earth can reach them. It is the last 10 minutes of the whole 10-day journey. More specifically, a stretch of about 4 minutes during the hottest part of coming home, when the outside of the capsule reaches temperatures above 2,760 degrees Celsius. During those minutes, the crew loses all contact with the ground, and the heat shield either works or it does not. There is no way to stop, no backup plan, no second chance. If something goes wrong in those 4 minutes, nobody on the ground can help, and the crew will not have time to fix it either. A capsule coming back from the space station enters the air at roughly 28,000 kilometers per hour. That is quick, but engineers have seen it hundreds of times and know what to expect. Orion will come back at just over 40,000 kilometers per hour, which is 32 times the speed of sound, and faster than any human has ever moved. At that speed, the air in front of the capsule cannot move out of the way fast enough. It gets squeezed together, heats up beyond anything imaginable, and turns into glowing plasma. The face of the heat shield climbs past 2,760 degrees Celsius. To put that in perspective, regular steel melts at about 1,370 degrees. Titanium breaks down around 1,670 degrees. The frame of Orion's crew module would turn to liquid in less than a second without protection. That protection is called Avcoat. Avcoat is what engineers call an ablative heat shield, which means it is built to slowly burn away on purpose. As the spacecraft slams into the upper air, the outer layer chars under the extreme heat. That charring soaks up a massive amount of heat energy. The charred layer then flakes off into the airstream, carrying that heat away with it. Layer by layer, the shield gives itself up so the structure underneath stays cool enough to make it. NASA used Avcoat on every Apollo command module that brought astronauts home from the Moon between 1968 and 1972. It worked perfectly every single time. So when Orion needed a shield strong enough for a return from the Moon, engineers went back to what they trusted. They probably should not have been quite so sure of themselves. The original Apollo heat shields were built as one single honeycomb structure, made up of around 320,000 tiny 6-sided cells, each one filled by hand with Avcoat material. It was slow, careful work that took months. For Orion, Lockheed Martin made the process faster. Instead of filling hundreds of thousands of tiny cells one by one, they made about 186 pre-shaped Avcoat blocks, each one made to fit a certain spot on the heat shield like a piece of a puzzle. This saved a huge amount of time. Whether it worked just as well was a question that could only be answered once the shield actually flew. And then it did. In November 2022, Artemis I sent an uncrewed Orion on a 25-day trip around the Moon and back. By nearly every measure, it was a great success. The celebration lasted until engineers got the capsule back to Kennedy Space Center and removed the heat shield for a closer look. More than 100 spots showed damage that nobody expected. Large pieces of charred Avcoat had cracked and broken off in jagged chunks. Not the smooth, even burning that years of ground testing had predicted, but rough, unpredictable material loss that in some areas had uncovered layers that were never meant to face re-entry heat directly. The damage matched something very specific about the way Orion had come home. Artemis I used a move called skip re-entry. Instead of dropping straight into the air, the capsule first dipped in to slow down using drag. It then used its shape to bounce back above the atmosphere like a flat rock skipping off water. After a short coast in near-empty space, it came back down for the final drop. The benefit is accuracy, letting mission planners choose where the capsule lands more easily. Apollo never used this. Skip re-entry was meant to be a modern improvement. Inside the Avcoat, it caused serious problems. During the skip phase, when the capsule climbed back above the atmosphere, the outside temperature dropped sharply. That drop triggered a chain reaction. Avcoat creates gases inside itself during ablation through a process of breaking down under heat without needing oxygen. Under steady high heat, those gases push outward through the porous charred layer. The system normally balances itself, but when heating stopped during the skip, the char layer became harder, less open, and less able to let gas through. The Avcoat underneath was still warm enough to keep making gas. That gas had nowhere to go. Pressure built up inside the blocks, and when the capsule dove back down for the second pass, those trapped pockets burst, blowing chunks of charred material off the shield. There is a detail in the investigation that does not get enough attention. Even with over 100 spots of unexpected material loss, the temperature inside the Orion cabin never went above the mid-70s in Fahrenheit. The shield was still doing its main job of blocking heat. The problem was that the material was falling apart while doing it, and nobody could predict where or how much would come off next. An ablative shield with unpredictable behavior is like a parachute that opens but might have random holes in it. It will probably slow you down. You just cannot know for sure by how much. NASA did not swap out the heat shield for Artemis II. The shield was already built and already attached to the crew module, and replacing it would have added years to a program that had already been pushed back from 2024 to 2025 to 2026 because of a long chain of technical problems, bad weather, and hydrogen leaks during practice runs. Jared Isaacman, the NASA administrator who personally flew to orbit on a SpaceX Dragon mission and understands spaceflight risk from inside a pressure suit rather than from behind a desk, looked at the data and decided to fly with the shield as it was. Instead of rebuilding it, NASA changed how the capsule would come home. The skip re-entry was removed completely. Orion will now fly a steeper, more direct path, hitting the atmosphere harder but for a shorter time. No pause in the middle, no moment where trapped gases can build up and crack the shield from the inside. The trade is real, though. Higher G-forces, bigger loads on the structure, more intense peak heating, and less choice in where the capsule can land. NASA tested Avcoat samples under the new conditions in test facilities at Ames Research Center. They ran computer models where the shield lost far more material than Artemis I ever did, and in every single test the cabin stayed intact. NASA's own estimate for overall mission risk is somewhere between 1 in 2 and 1 in 50. On the better end, that is roughly a 2% chance of losing the crew. On the worse end, it is a coin flip. NASA's official limit for acceptable risk on Artemis missions is 1 in 30. Rick Henling is the lead flight director for re-entry. His whole focus is getting the crew safely through that final phase. He leads the team in Houston that watches every number during the descent in real time, except during the most dangerous window, when he will not be able to see anything at all. That blackout has been a dark cloud over human spaceflight since the Mercury program in the early 1960s. At hypersonic speeds, the plasma shell around the capsule blocks radio waves across almost every usable frequency. No signal gets in and none gets out. For roughly 4 minutes during peak heating, Rick Henling and every controller in Houston will sit at their stations, staring at blank screens and counting seconds. During those 4 minutes, sealed inside a capsule pushed to the edge of what it can handle, the crew will have nothing to do but trust the work of the engineers and wait for the plasma to fade. In April 1970, the crew of Apollo 13 came home after their ship was badly damaged by an exploding oxygen tank. Nobody knew if the heat shield on the command module had been hurt in the blast. The expected blackout was 3 minutes. It stretched past 4, then 5, then 6. Gene Cernan and his team sat in total silence, watching a clock and a dark screen. When Charlie Duke finally heard Jack Swigert's voice break through the static, the whole room fell apart with relief. 33 years later, Columbia broke apart during re-entry on February 1, 2003, because a chunk of foam had struck the protective tiles on the wing during launch, and no one caught the damage in time. The crew never got a warning. Mission Control did not know what had happened until the data feed went silent and never returned. Heat shield failure during re-entry is not just a theory. It has already killed 7 people. There is something about re-entry that no other part of spaceflight shares. Launch is loud and shaking, but it feels like a beginning, full of energy and the thrill of leaving Earth behind. The coast between Earth and the Moon is peaceful. Wiseman told reporters during a live call from space that he watched the entire planet from one pole to the other as the sun went down behind it. The way he paused mid-sentence made it clear the moment was bigger than any words he had. But re-entry is a moment of truth. The angle has to be exactly right. Come in too shallow, and the capsule bounces off the atmosphere and drifts into deep space forever. Come in too steep, and the forces and heat become more than the ship and the crew can survive. The shield has to hold. The parachutes have to open in the right order. The cabin has to stay sealed. Everything happens in minutes, not hours, while falling at speeds that turn the air itself into fire. Orion's heat shield is 5 meters wide, the largest ablative shield ever built for a crewed spacecraft. Those 186 Avcoat blocks range from about 2.5 to 7.5 centimeters thick. That is the margin between life and death. A few centimeters of a material made to burn in a very controlled way, standing between 4 human beings and plasma hot enough to vaporize bare metal before the mind could even process what was happening. After the hottest part of re-entry, if the shield holds, Orion will still be falling fast. At around 7,600 meters above the ground, 2 small drogue parachutes will open to steady the capsule and slow it from about 480 kilometers per hour. Then 3 pilot chutes will pull out 3 large main parachutes, bringing the drop rate down to about 27 kilometers per hour. Landing is planned in the Pacific Ocean, off the coast of San Diego, where a US Navy ship will be ready and waiting. If everything works, Artemis II will have proved something the entire future of American moon exploration depends on. Not just that Orion can fly to the moon and back, because Artemis I already showed that. What Artemis II must show is that Orion can bring people home from deep space, that the heat shield can protect a crew in the most extreme heat any crewed spacecraft has ever faced, and that the new re-entry path solves the gas pressure problem for good. Artemis III, the mission that will actually put people on the moon's surface, cannot fly until Artemis II proves the way home is safe. There is another layer of risk hiding beneath the heat shield story. The crew launched during the most active part of solar cycle 25 when the sun is at its most unpredictable. Beyond the protective belts around Earth, a single, large burst of solar energy could deliver a serious radiation dose to the crew. Orion has a small shelter built into the capsule, the most protected corner the crew can squeeze into if a solar storm hits. Whether that shelter is good enough for the worst possible event has never been tested with real people on board. All 4 crew members reviewed the heat shield investigation fully. They saw the photos of the damage on Artemis I. They studied the new descent plan, the risk numbers, and the test results. They understood what 1 in 50 means and what 1 in 2 means, and they got in the capsule anyway. Reid Wiseman spent years landing fighter jets on aircraft carrier decks at night, which is essentially parking a car moving at 250 kilometers per hour onto a moving platform the size of a tennis court, in the dark, over open ocean. Victor Glover flew combat missions and has already lived aboard the International Space Station. Christina Koch spent 328 days straight in orbit, which was at the time the longest single spaceflight ever completed by a woman. Jeremy Hansen is a former CF-18 fighter pilot, and the only one of the 4 who has never been to space before. Around April 10th, Orion will reach the point 122,000 meters above Earth's surface, where the air becomes thick enough to matter. The European-built service module, which has provided power, thrust, water, and breathable air for the entire trip, will separate from the crew module and burn up in the atmosphere behind them. Everything that is no longer needed gets left behind before re-entry. The launch abort system, the solid rocket boosters, the main engines, the service module, one by one, down to every part of the 30-story rocket that carried 4 people off the surface of the Earth has been thrown away until all that is left is a capsule about the size of a large SUV falling through space alone. Orion will turn until the heat shield is pointed in the direction of travel. The guidance computer will take over, making tiny adjustments to the capsule's angle, using small thrusters, steering the path toward the landing zone. Within 90 seconds, the temperature will pass 2000 degrees. Plasma will wrap around the capsule like a closing hand, and then exactly as expected, the radio will go silent. For 4 minutes, the crew of Artemis II will be alone with the laws of physics. No help from the ground, no data link. In Houston, Rick Henling and his team will watch blank screens and count the seconds. They have practiced for this silence. Practice is not the same as the real thing, and everyone in that room knows it. Everyone in that room also knows that when the signal returns, when that first piece of voice or data breaks through the thinning plasma, every person in mission control will know the answer to the only question that has mattered since this whole mission began. The shield held or it did not. 54 years ago, we stopped going to the moon. We had the tools, we had the rockets, we had astronauts willing to make the trip, but we stopped. And for more than half a century, the farthest people went was a few hundred kilometers above Earth's surface, going in circles in low orbit, close enough to see city lights below at night. Artemis II is the first step back. Not a giant leap forward, just a test to see if it can be done. I'm 4 people flying a spacecraft that has never carried a crew, looping around a place humanity walked away from 2 generations ago, protected by a shield that did not act the way anyone expected the last time it flew. Everything that comes after, every moon landing, every long stay on the surface, every piece of infrastructure we ever build beyond Earth, depends on what happens over the next few days. If the signal comes back, the moon becomes a place we can go again. If it does not, everything stops. We will know soon. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.